I'm proud to present you our first speaker here. Monica Ratte works as Federal Commissioner for ICT Security for the whole federal administration at the new National Cybersecurity Center. And before this, she worked for the Swiss Armed Forces. She graduated at EPFL in mathematics and information security and will today tell us about the real skills to have to work in IT security. And Monica, I'll leave it over to you now.
Thanks for joining me for this presentation. I will present you now my view on the real skills I think you need to have to work in IT security. During my studies, I learned about the technical aspects of IT security. You see here some of the books I had to deal with and learn about. And as most people, when I started to work in IT security, I thought that the most needed skill were the technical one. Do I know this protocol? Does it have known vulnerabilities? Do I understand how they work? Which are the mitigation possibilities, and so on? In fact, exactly what I learned during my studies. But when I started to work in IT security, I found that it wasn't really enough. And I will present to you now my journey to realize my current role as Federal Commissioner for IT Security, the different skills that I had to learn, and I think that important to work today in IT security, and the many reality checks that I had since I started working for the federal administration already 8 years ago. Yes, technical knowledge is a basis you really have to know to work there. But as you surely know, the technology evolves at a very rapid pace. The architecture, for example, is now heavily based on virtualization, which was not the case before. The use of clouds has expanded, which leads to another placement of the data and to new consideration about their security. Those are only two examples of technology evolution. There are a lot more of them. And when someone comes to me with a question about some system, I'd quite often never have heard of the technology that is used there. And the first things I have to do is go on and search, okay, what is it really? Do I know that before I can do anything about it? So in cybersecurity, it's crucial that you stay up to date with the new technologies and want to learn more about it, because you will never know everything there is to know about it, or at least I don't think it's possible. Now, BPMN. That as I started to work as a security incident manager, I had to define a lot of processes. What should we do in which case? How should we react? Who should be involved when? On the basis of which event comes the next step. A good way to write this and draw good and understandable processes is the business process modeling notation, in short BPMN. I hadn't heard of it before and had to learn it. It's really interesting that for those of you who studied or are studying math, it reminded me a little bit of algorithmic. You can find plenty of documentation about it online. For example, the EC standard BPMN modeling convention for public administration. A really important skill in Switzerland are the languages. Myself, I always wanted to work long-term in Switzerland. Perhaps you hear it, but my mother tongue is French, and I speak Italian too. During my master at EPFL, all the courses were in English, so I had to learn it too. And in technical fields, the most of the existing documentation or the exchanges, such as the event today, are held in English, and so you have at least to understand it. But to get interesting work in Switzerland, I think that knowing German is a really good asset. In order to learn it, I decided myself to look for a job in the Swiss-German part in Switzerland and got one in Bern. I can tell you, at the beginning, it was really not easy. I had to follow courses, translate a lot of things I was working on, but I got there in the end, and now I work the whole day in German, and my German is a lot better than my English. Then when you get hired by a company, you have to learn about the business side of it. This is central because otherwise you will never get what is really important there and why. As IT security specialist, you have to do risk analysis sometimes and protect the most valuable assets. So you need to understand the business side. The case of the Swiss Federal Administration is quite special because it concerns about everything. First, I started to work in the army, as Aina said before, and frankly, I didn't know anything about it. Since I didn't serve myself in the army, I had to learn the organization, the structure, the ranks, in order to understand why some systems were more critical than others. Now I have to evaluate system in the whole administration, and I had to learn about a lot of other things that I didn't know about. For example, measuring system by agroscope for smart farming or biodiversity indicators, or measuring system by the Swiss Federal Sport Administration, for example, to help elite athletes to improve their performance. I have to learn about the DATITS programs. That's a huge transformation program of the Swiss Custom Administration, where all the custom tax duty collection processes are being simplified and fully digitalized. I had a project that was on the old age and survivor insurance and disabled insurance pension for the Central Compensation Office, and I had to learn how it works. Another interesting one was the taxation of alcoholic beverages and the systems that are used behind it. I didn't know we had that in Switzerland. And as you can guess, COVID happens, and COVID app, COVID certificate was a theme too. So a lot of different things. Now, in order to communicate with all these entities, you have to speak with those people. And each domain has its own way to communicate, so you have to adapt to it. I had to learn to present in front of big audiences and convince them. And why convince them? Because often cybersecurity is not the priority and costs a lot. As a woman, I noticed that I had to prove a little bit more as other that I'm able to do my job. When they see me, some people do not expect at first that I'm really able to do my job. They don't expect a young woman speaking about cybersecurity, and this happened quite a lot. But after discussing a little bit more about work, the people accept me as competent in my field. So now I had simply to take this task into account, and I'm used to it, and I now know how to deal with it and take it into account. In cybersecurity, you have a lot to deal with geek if you're not already one yourself. A little hint, if you recognize a picture here on the slide, perhaps you can guess to which category you belong. But anyway, you have to speak the techies language, and on the other side, you have to explain the techies position to the management, because the management has to take good and right decision on understandable information. I have to do this kind of translation quite a lot. But I think it's really important, because if those two levels doesn't understand each other, it will be really hard for your company to have good cybersecurity. So adaptation is a key competence, and you have to be able to speak with a lot of different people and on different levels. But cybersecurity does not only concern people that have to explicitly deal with it. It is a complex theme that concerns everyone, which means that not only the techies or the management has to know about it, but everyone has to be aware of cybersecurity. So our job is to make it accessible to everyone too. I have, for example, to give courses, participate in awareness programs, and write outreach documents to explain some IT aspects to non-technical people. Explaining security to people that are not IT affine is a complete new work, I find. You have to make it interesting for people who wouldn't necessarily find it interesting by themselves. You have to explain things to make it understandable, and that's not always an easy task to achieve. But I find it one of the most rewarding one. When I get someone interested in this topic, when at the beginning they tell me, yeah, you know, cybersecurity, that's too technical for me and not for me. Then I'm really happy and I think I've did something important. So here you see an example of the last awareness campaign we took part in. So the Super Save, Update, Protect, Equip and Reduce for the whole Swiss population that you can find online. One example of a little advent calendar that we distributed in the federal administration, and an explanation here of the use of cloud for cloud services for IT projects. In 2017, I moved into a team that draws up IT security specification for the whole federal administration. And I had to learn how to write security requirements in a more legal binding way. That's a bit different. Something that we have specific by us. In the normal world, everything that is not explicitly forbidden is allowed. By the Swiss federal administration, that's the other way around. So everything that isn't on a legal basis is forbidden. This means that we have to have a lot of ordinances and other specification. And in order to work right and respect them, we have to know and understand them. For the writing of those ordinances, as the one you see here, the Ordinance on Protection Against Cyber Risk in the Federal Administration, on which I worked the last 2 years, I had to work with legal experts. For myself, I know a few things about law, whereas they only know a few things about cybersecurity. So again, it was a challenge to come to something that fit for both of us on the technical level, but such as on the legal one. Another topic in which IT security is sadly too often forgotten is purchase. If you want to have secure systems, you have to plan it from the beginning. And purchase and contracts are of great importance for it. So in order to assure security by design, you need to have it included in the contracts with your external supplier. This means to have to write those requirements in the corresponding formal ways, which is another thing. This is often added afterwards, which means less good security and more expensive security. I think it is very important to include IT security in the purchase process. But this again means that the security people have to understand this and work with purchase managers. Another particularity of the Swiss federal administration are the politics. I do not know if you're familiar with the way of working of the politics in Switzerland, but the parliament decides on the new law and oversees the Federal Council and the federal administration. Members of the Federal Assembly, parliamentary groups and committees can initiate measures, propose new legislations, and request information or reports. In order to do it, they can use several instruments. You've already heard motion, postulate, interpellation, amongst other things. This comes to us, and we have to answer them and give our explanation in a politic, understandable way. This was new to me, and that was something I absolutely didn't learn during my studies. A topic I didn't mention are the news. As working on citizen data and with tax money, what does the federal administration interest the public and the reporters? So as soon as we do something, we have to plan that it could possibly land in the news. For example, on January 19, 2020, our technical team, so govcert.ch, released a tweet informing about a critical vulnerability in Internet Explorer. The very next day, this tweet was mentioned on Inside IT. The day afterwards, we decided to block IE on our system in order to protect them. You can guess what happened next. A week later, this was again published on Inside IT. So this shows how what we do on our system does not just stay there, but can be publicly noticed. So we have to think that all our big security decisions could land in the paper and plan accordingly. In particular, we have to brief and inform, explain it to our communication specialists so they can prepare when questions from journalists arise. And this list doesn't stop there. I could go on and on. In the field on cybersecurity, we have to take a lot of decision. Sometimes decision to be made has to be made in a really short time frame under great pressure. And sometimes you have to wait and be patient because some action, technical or legal, need a lot of time. So we have external factor to take into consideration too. I already said politics, but finances too. The first questions that pop often with security is, but how much does it cost? That's all things that you learn on the job, one day after the other. So I think it's not possible for one person to have all these skills. That's why it's really important to have diversity in security teams, and different backgrounds are really important, and why women have their part to play there too. At the end of the day, I have to say that my work does not have a lot to do with what I did during my studies. I write ordinances and advise on them. I assess system and their security. I help to improve them and make it conform to those ordinances. I help developing new organizations such as the National Cybersecurity Center. I answer a lot of mail with a lot of different questions. I talk with plenty of different people, from security specialists to top management, and now I just took the lead of a team. But most importantly, I enjoy what I do. And what makes it interesting for me is that I never do the same thing all the time. There are always new topics and new methods to learn about. As I've just shown you, in the past year, I always learn something new, and I know it will keep on this way. I never know what will come into my day. That can be scary for some people, but I find it exciting. I learn new things every single day, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this small view on my journey towards my current role as a Federal Commissioner for IT Security, and all the different skills that I had to learn and I think that are important today to work in this field. If you have questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Monica. I found it very interesting to listen to you. I have one question. So what do you consider to be the most interesting aspect when working in the field of cyber for the government?
I think a good point is you work on a great variety of projects. As I've shown you, there is so much topics I didn't know we had at the federal administration. But another important point is that you work for your country, for the Swiss citizen, for people living in Switzerland, for Swiss companies. And I think that's important and it gives me motivation for my work.
Thank you. I'll have another one which came to my mind during your presentation. In the time you've worked for the Swiss Armed Forces, what has been your biggest challenge?
As I said, I didn't serve myself in the army. So it was a great challenge to come into this world, learn about it, about the structures. That's something there very important there. All the abbreviations, there are a lot of them in the army. And I had to learn a new job, a new language at the same time and adapt to it. So that was a great challenge for me.
Thank you. We often get the impression that working for the government is connected with slow processes and low innovation. How did you experience that, or how do you experience that?
I think if you do not want low processes, then come and change that, because a lot of people tell me that, and then I come and I say, hey, I want to do things this way, and it works. So if we have motivated people, we can do a lot of things.
Thank you. And another one is, where do you start when you get thrown into a completely new field? So maybe what are your techniques to get used to a completely new field? Where do you begin?
I do not have a method for it. I think what's important is you start where you like. I always chose my studies and my job because I find it exciting. And then you have motivation and then you can come forward.
How do you motivate yourself when facing the challenges of being a woman in cyber?
It doesn't demotivated me, if I can say so. For me, I'm used to it because I was always the only woman in the team I've worked, but I'm happy if it changed, and it's why I take part to events like today.
And one more question, what are the competencies of the NCSC?
Of the NCSCs, you can find it on our website. It's really bright. We have a single point of contact for when you have a cyber incident and you have to notify us. You can do it on our website. We help critical infrastructure for cyber incidents mitigation. And then we have a function as I work here, so to write ordinances and look on the whole security of the federal administration.
Thank you. And one more question. I often feel like there's so much happening and I'm always lacking behind. How do you cope with this? So it's not specified in which field or where it's much happening, but maybe you know this feeling that there's a lot of things going on and you're always one step behind. How do you deal with this feeling?
I think you have to accept that. As I showed you, there are so much things that are important in this field. Only if I want to follow what's come new in the technology, I would have to look on papers the whole day, and that's not possible. So I think you have to decide, okay, what am I good at? And then say, okay, I will focus on this field. And then with the diversity in a team with different background, together we have all the competencies we need to come forward.
Thank you. And one more question. Do you see signals that the government encourages women in management positions, and how?
I think I'm a good example of it. I just took the lead of a team. I'm deputy head of the informatic security of the whole Swiss Federal Administration, and I think it's really accepted now. So just that I am an example that it's possible there.
Thank you, Monica. So far, we have no more questions. Monica, thank you very much for breaking the ice here and then presenting the first presentation.